time, I will call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We have an agenda before us, so there ain't changes to that agenda. If not, we'll operate under that agenda. I'll move us to agenda item number 2, which will be to consider the approval of the minutes of the work session and the regular council meeting. Both were held on September 24th. The council does have the minutes of both of those meetings. Are there any corrections?
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim to approve the minutes of both meetings as they were presented. We'll move to a vote. Close the voting. And the motion does pass. We'll move then to agenda item number 3. This is the first of several public hearings that we'll have this evening. This public hearing is for ice and snow removal and weed elimination from private property in the city of Marshall. I'll call on Kyle Box, our city clerk, to conduct this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Every year, we adopt this resolution, adopting snow and weed assessments. This is done on, like I said, a yearly basis, so this would be the last snow season and this year's mowing season. So a couple of the properties have already contacted me to pay off this before the meeting, so we will adjust the resolution as necessary. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. I'll open up for input as part of the public hearing, either from the council or from members of the audience. There isn't.
Approval.
I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Russ to close the public hearing. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting. The motion does pass. Now we'll move then to agenda item number 4, the point of order here was the adoption then of that will need to be a separate action, Kyle?
Yeah, the first motion was to close the public hearing. This one will be to adopt the resolution.
Okay, so agenda item number 4 would be to consider the resolution that would adopt the assessment. Thank
Move
you.
approval.
Motion by Craig, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by John. Discussion?
Do we need to make the motion to approve pending
Adjustments?
adjustments?
I think that's assumed in the motion.
Yep.
And second, okay, good point. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting, and the motion passes. Now we'll move to agenda item number 5. This is the project Z70-2. This would be the South High, South Whitney Street, 100-200 block alley improvement. This action or this item will be a public hearing on the assessment. So I'll call on Glenn Olson, City Engineer and Director of Public Works, to conduct this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This project is like you see on the screen. It was a project to install storm sewer in the alley between Whitney Street and High Street and connects down at Marshall Street. The project was bid. We have the assessment roll for you. The assessments include all properties adjacent to the alley except for the north 3 that their property drains towards College Drive. They're all the same except for those properties that requested an individual storm sewer service onto their property. You can see there was one. All the rest declined to put a service line in. They could put a service line in at any time in the future, and once this is approved, the city then is responsible for the operation and maintenance of that storm sewer line. But for initial installations, it's all assessed to the property owners. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. We'll open up for input from the council as well as members of the audience as part of this public hearing. Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Glenn, just for clarification, but the private connects to the pipe will still be the responsibility of the individual property owners, correct?
That is correct,
And is that all the way out to the pipe or to the alley right of way?
to the main.
To the main, okay.
Other input as part of the public hearing? If there's
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
motion by John, seconded by Russ to close the public hearing. Discussion? If there's no discussion, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Oh, I'm sorry. Now we'll close the voting.
Touch the screen.
The motion does pass. Do you want to,
Yeah, it's a yay, yeah.
so the motion passes. So we will then move to the next agenda item, which would be agenda item number 6. This is the resolution that would adopt the assessment. Questions about the resolution?
Just for clarification, all of the owners that have all been in agreement, I mean, this was something that was met and everybody was part of that process. I move the resolution adopting the assessment.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting. Motion passes. Agenda item number 7. This is a public hearing on the assessment on the Huron Road, Superior Road Reconstruction Project. Once again, Glenn Olson, I'll ask you to conduct this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You can see that this one's a little more expensive than the storm sewer project, nearing $1 million. And this is another one of those examples where we take the project cost, we subtract out the cost that was done because of utility work. So for instance, anything that was done over the water main is assessed to MMU. Anything done over the sanitary sewer main, including the sanitary sewer replacement, is billed to wastewater. Anything that's done for replacement of storm sewer is billed to the storm sewer account. The rest of it then is broken out into assessable footage. And the original method of doing that is by the front foot. So we did that, and then, of course, we have the 3 methods of differentiation of assessment. We do it by equivalencies of residential properties, and there's 3 methods of assessment then, A, B, and C, and the lowest method is used for the recommendation that you have tonight. That then defers the difference to the ad valorem part, to the city's amount. And you can see that on your last page concerning the assessments where the city is picking up probably $350,000 of that assessment because of that formula. So the work is essentially complete. We have some minor work left to do, but this is the assessment role as defined by ordinances. If you have any questions, I'd certainly take them.
Okay, we'll open it up as part of the public hearing for any comments, either from the council or the audience.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion by Russ, seconded by Jim to close the public hearing. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. You vote. We'll close voting. Motion passes. Agenda item number 8 then would be the resolution that would adopt the assessment for the Huron Road, Superior Road reconstruction.
Move to accept.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion?
Now, is this project completely done now, Glenn?
Yes, it's essentially complete. We might have some minor landscaping or something to do, but yes, it's essentially complete.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think we're moving pretty fast on this, but this has been an important project. It actually was a 2-year project because
Yeah.
the first part of it, and I think our staff is to be commended on how it turned out.
I'll
Yeah,
let them
and
know.
I wanted to say too, I really appreciate it, because I know there was a lot of concern and issue with some of the property owners, and I think that our staff did a really, really good job of working with all the people involved to get an equitable solution to this, to get the project done the way we needed it. I appreciate MMU's participation, cooperation. I know that pulling Huron, we did a trench box instead so that the charges would not include, local or assessed to the property owners for that part of it to satisfy those concerns, and I really appreciate it. I think it was good that everybody pulled the project the same direction.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting. Motion passes. Okay, we'll move then to the consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the screen that are on the consent agenda. And they include the consideration of the introduction of the cable franchise ordinance between the City of Marshall and Clarity Telecom LLC, doing business as Vast Broadband. Consider the resolution declaring a building blighted and substandard for redevelopment. The introduction of the ordinance establishing the licensing and regulations for mobile food units and food carts. The introduction of the ordinance amending Chapter 2, Article 6, Division 12, Merit Center Board, wastewater treatment facilities improvement project. Consider the payment of the invoice to Bolton and Mink. The wastewater treatment facilities improvement project. Consider the application of payment number 3 to Magdy Construction Incorporated. The bituminous chip sealing on various city streets. We have a change order, the final change order to consider. We have an application for an exempt license for United Way of Southwest Minnesota, as well as the bills and the project payment. So is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for purposes of a separate discussion?
15.
Pardon me?
15.
Number 10.
Okay. Any other item? If not, is there a motion to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Motion passes. We'll move then to agenda item number 10. I'll turn to you, Glenn.
With regard to this item, and in our agenda packet, it said that final documents will be provided prior to the October 8th council meeting. Did we get those? They weren't as attachments then?
Correct. The documents were uploaded prior to the meeting this afternoon, just before our earlier work session. So it can be something if we want to look into. This is, staff has been working on this the last couple of days to make sure it's ready for the council meeting this evening.
Okay, because I was checking the agenda here and didn't see the attachments, and I think the last time we acted on this, and it was the same block 11, there were like 5 attachments, and I didn't see the attachments here, so I didn't have anything to look at, so I was wondering if they were provided.
They are on the updated packet this evening, correct?
I guess I'd suggest that we wait and vote on it at the next meeting then, so we have a chance to look at those documents.
That's fine if the council chooses to do so. This is one piece of the puzzle for Block 11, and correct me if I'm wrong, Annette, but by not passing this resolution, it kind of delays the project or the demolition of Block 11, which, Glenn, I believe is slated to start early this week, or the next week. So this is one piece of the domino, I guess. But we can provide further information.
Correct. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So back in 2014, when we did this the first time, they provided all the information that is generally done prior to setting up a TIF district. So when we get later on down kind of closer to creating that TIF district, that's when all that information will be provided when that gets a little closer. This resolution is just making sure that the buildings meet the substandard and blight condition per state statute, and that was the building department's building inspection actually had the 3 reports on each of the buildings in order to make sure we're meeting that standard.
I would encourage us to get the documents to us sooner than the afternoon of our meeting, because like I said, I've been checking on this from time to time, and I couldn't find it on the agenda. And if we're going to vote on something like this, I think the documents should be provided prior to the meeting.
I have a question. Glenn, this is the bid that we received only one bid on it, and we went back and had a rebid. So this has been floating out there for 60 days already, give or take.
Yeah.
Correct.
As well as the previous actions on the other buildings that were demolished.
I would make a motion that we approve the resolution declaring the buildings blighted and substandard for redevelopment.
Second?
Motion by Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion?
Whereas, Mr. Mayor, I would say that I'm in agreement with Mr. Baracola most of the time on this particular issue. However, given that we have a picture on the next slide in our packets of what it is, and we're all well familiar with these properties, I would vote in favor of this.
Other discussion on the motion?
And Steve, that's why I made the motion, because we've been working on this for quite a while, and
Yep.
sounds good.
There's no other discussion. We'll move to a vote.
There you go.
Okay.
Just late.
We got a little delay on my computer here, so. Okay, we'll close the voting. The motion does pass. So we'll move now to agenda item number 15. Craig?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, again, this is one of those positive change orders that actually creates a negative to the final amount, and I believe that that's because we dropped the parking lot at Red Baron Arena and Expo.
If we really wanted to use all the money, we'd have to designate a whole new space, but yes, you're correct.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. I would make a motion to approve.
Motion by Craig, is there a second? Seconded by Jim. Discussion? If there's no discussion, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting.
I voted yes.
Motion does pass unanimously.
We'll take your word for it.
Okay, so we will move then to agenda item number 18, consider the authorization to enter into a purchase and sale agreement of city-owned property to the Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association. We'll start with Sharon. We do have representatives of the MMUA that are here also. Sharon?
Mayor and council, we were approached by MMUA earlier this year regarding their interest in purchasing property near their MMUA training facility that's located on Michigan Road. They made an offer on the land where currently they have some of their training equipment on. We did have an agreement, purchase agreement drafted by our city attorney, and he has reviewed this in form and execution, and staff is recommending approval of the purchase agreement. I do want to add that, and we'll have MMUA come before the council and talk about their impact on their training facilities and what this will mean for the community. It is in part economic development for the city of Marshall, and we hope to reap a lot of benefits in terms of training that they can now bring in. And I don't want to steal all their thunder, but MMUA is a statewide organization. It's fortunate that Marshall has this facility in the city. We could have had some competition on this interest. And again, fortunate that MMUA wants to make an investment in the city of Marshall. So some of the purchase price is reflected in the fact that we have great interest in maintaining their presence in the city of Marshall. We don't want them to go to another location in the state, which may be easy for them to do. I do want to introduce two individuals from MMUA. Jack Cagle is the executive director of MMUA, and he can talk about the importance of their organization, and Mike Willets, who has direct knowledge of the training opportunities they bring into the city. He is the director of training and safety for MMUA, and although he's not going to make a presentation, I do also want to note our local connection to MMUA training director, Cody Raveling, who is also in the audience and obviously in support of the investment that MMUA is making in the city of Marshall. So Jack and Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much.
So welcome.
Mayor, members of the council, I'm Jack Cagle, Executive Director of MMUA, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this evening. Just to provide a little context, going back into the late 1990s, the previous century, it's hard to believe, discussions began developing about the Merit Center, developing a police and fire training center here. And those discussions led to the idea of having MMUA develop a municipal utility training center on the land adjacent to the Merit Center. We were very interested. The conversation moved rather quickly, and the city agreed to lease us the land that we're on now for 20 years, beginning in October 1999. And by the summer of 2020, we had collected enough donations to complete the building that sits on the site today. It cost about $350,000. And almost all of that money came from member donations. Over the last 20 years, we've provided valuable training to thousands of municipal utility workers from all over the country and actually all over the world. We've had students from several Caribbean countries and from as far away as American Samoa. Each year, we hold about 8 events at the training center, and those events typically generate 850 to 900 hotel stays and approximately 1,700 to 1,800 meals prepared either by local caterers or restaurants. We are very pleased with the relationship that we've had with the city over the last 20 years. And I have to also add the relationship that we've had with Brad and the municipal utility folks. They have been just tremendous to work with. We want to continue to build on what we've done so far. We want to continue developing the facility. We're interested in building another building there. And so we obviously would like to have the security that comes with knowing that we own the land. We want to be here for the long term. We want to be able to make investments in the facility. And we think that owning the facility would give us the confidence that we can move ahead. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mike, and he can give you a few more details about what we actually do there.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thanks for having us. I just wanted to cover a couple things. Number one, Sharon did mention Cody Raveling, our training coordinator, and we're really happy to have him in town and running our facility, and does a great job. Just some of the infrastructure and things that we have at the training center, overhead and underground. I guess I'm going to cover the workshops first. Overhead school, underground school, a metering workshop, transformer workshop, cross-training, excavation, locating, in the line workers rodeo at the overhead school, which will be coming up this next Tuesday. And I would encourage all of you to come out next Tuesday morning around 9 o'clock or so and take part in that. It's a pretty amazing event with all line workers from Minnesota coming to participate. Some improvements that we've done through the start of the facility. We've installed 2 substations, all of which the distribution and everything that we've installed are all designed for line workers to do training on a mock situation. So they're not energized, but we in a mock situation. 2 underground vaults which are in the parking lot, which we can do confined space entry and so on, of working with conductors. Electric distribution systems and metering facilities, gas distribution that we have throughout the facility too. We actually have a gas leak detection field down on the field too, to be able to do training on leak gas detection. Want to put up a cold storage building. That's kind of what started this conversation of purchasing the facility, is making sure that we can continue growing and building new structures on the training grounds to make everything a little better. We also want to construct a solar field, a small solar field to go along with basically what the industry is doing today, and make sure that we can train folks properly on that also. We want to build a confined space training facility that is actually above ground. So you'll come down, you'll be able to watch and safely remove somebody in a mock in a safe environment, so they don't have to worry about the gases and the hazards of doing rescue. I too want to mention the impact. Number one, the impact that we've had on the training for power line workers and actually all city government throughout since the inception of this place in 1999. We've trained thousands of line workers and employees, and I know we've saved a lot of lives with that. I also want to point out Brad and the crew at MMU have done a great job. I've said many times that there's no way that we could have done what we've done without those folks and their help and cooperation, and your cooperation from the very beginning. So thank you.
With that, we'll open up for perhaps any questions or comments. I would just make a comment that this is a facility that provides really much needed training, and we're pleased and proud that it is in Marshall, really providing, as you say, Jack, not only a state-wide training opportunities, but even beyond that. So, and I think we've all seen, the visitors to the community, whether it's at a breakfast place or a hotel or whatever, that they are making an impact on the community, but more importantly, they're receiving quality training. So, other comments, John?
And just one thing, you talked about confined space training. I know that's something that the Merit Center has some facilities, but it was, in the past anyway, has talked about expanding. There may be some opportunities for some partnership between the two, since it's right across the other side of your lot. So that would be great if you could.
Yeah, and
maybe work
we've
with
done
that.
some of that.
Okay,
We've
that'd be
done some
great.
of that, and we use the classroom facilities over there also. So.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Craig?
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that. I really appreciate it, and the fact that it's spatially located near the Merit Center is a good connector, but it's also, Cody's there, sits as our on the board at the Merit, and is key in what's happening out there, and that relationship continues to grow, and I think that the MMUA Center and the Merit Center pair up very well, and I think it's just a really good expansion, and I'm really glad to see that you come forward to do this, and I really support this. I think this is a real good move, and it's a footprint that you're using to a degree already, and I don't see a lot of other development short of doing a lot of filling that would be anything out there, and I just think that this is the perfect place, and you guys are the perfect addition in the community, and I really appreciate the work that takes place there.
And when Jack was going through the history, I was here when this facility was started, and this was a location that had limited other development opportunities. So this is really a well-suited use for this space.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
With the talk of expansion, is that going to expand the number of classes you offer out there, as you talked about expanding your solar, or putting a solar field out there and above-ground concealed container, is that going to bring more people to Marshall through more training and more?
It may, go ahead.
There isn't a lot of training that's going on for solar facilities now, so if we get a small demonstration facility, it gives us something else to build training around.
So, and I know, example, I know it brings people into town, because I have a nephew who's a line worker up on the iron range, and their crew comes down to Marshall. I think it was twice a year they were coming. So we're attracting people, worldwide, and so the public knows that they are coming from a long ways away. Get some of the iron range money in Marshall is good.
All money in Marshall's good.
Could we see the map up there of exactly what parcel they're purchasing? So it starts in the right-hand column and goes over where, right there.
That bold
Yeah.
black line around.
So essentially, it's the same footprint that they've been
They're
occupying.
occupying right now.
Right. I guess I have a few questions. I think when the agreement was signed 20-some years ago, the rent was like $10 a year? And is it still $10 a year then, or?
Yes.
Okay. And we really appreciate your presence in Marshall. We're glad to have you here and glad to use the land. You've benefited by a low rental cost. It's $200 for 20 years worth of rent, which is a benefit to you, but it's also been a benefit to our community. So again, we're thankful that you chose to place your training facility in the city of Marshall. I do have questions about the property involved, because if you go back to that parcel, that picture, whatever, I noticed that two of the lots that you're buying, do you see in the lower part there, there's a lot 1 and 2. I looked at the assessed values of those according to the county tax records, and the assessed value for those two parcels is $215,900. And you're buying not only those parcels, but additional parcels too, twice as much land as that. And I would assume that those parcels are the ones that are worth the most money. But it seems like you're getting a substantial discount here. You're paying less than 10% of what the assessed value is. And I guess I'm wondering, how did you arrive at the price of around $18,000?
MMUA is a nonprofit. We don't have deep pockets. We wanted to make a contribution. We wanted to purchase the land rather than just ask for it to be given to us. But we have limited resources. Our board is very careful about the spending that we make. I proposed a price of $1,000 an acre, and the board accepted that. Something beyond that would be difficult for us. And we hope that much of a contribution and continuing the work that we're doing here will be acceptable to the council, and we can continue the partnership.
I think the city of Marshall, do we still pay you around $18,000, $19,000 a year for training purposes?
I don't have that number, but I know that the city does
Right.
train with us.
And so you do receive revenues you have municipalities or municipal utilities all over the state, correct?
Yes.
And I guess I'm willing certainly to give you a discount because you do serve a number of municipal utilities, but I feel like the other utilities should help pay in the cost of here. We're donating a lot for this thing here, and wouldn't it be good to have some of the other communities help chip in to pay for the cost of the land through their fees or dues or whatever, because it seems like we're bearing a huge part of the cost here. And I would assume that you charge fees to cover your costs. You're a nonprofit, but you do serve municipal utilities all over the state. And you raise your rates or lower them based on your demand for money and how much money you need to operate. And I guess, like I said, I would like to see the other communities, the other utilities contribute a little more towards the purchase price and have the purchase price a little closer to what the true fair market value of the property is.
Are there other input before we move to a motion? If not, I would accept a motion.
I will make a motion to accept the terms of the sale as it is, and realizing that, yes, it is a good price, but over the past 20 years, you've made a lot of contributions to this community and in many ways to the citizens of this community. So I'm in favor of this and make the motion to approve.
Motion by John, is there a second? Seconded by Craig. Discussion on the motion?
I was just seconding, I was agree with you, John, because it's more than just the purchase price of the land, it's the number of folks they bring into town. It's, you know, the services, that when you said thousands, I don't know how many people you bring in every year, a couple hundred, 1,000, you know, meals. That all adds up, and if we don't bring those people into town, then our land values aren't worth what they're assessed at today, especially on commercial and industry. If we can't bring people to town to support our businesses we have, our values will go down. So sometimes we got to give some to make, you got to spend money to make money, plain and simple, and that's what we're doing here.
And I'm also encouraged about the additional investment that you're planning to make out there. Other
Mr. Mayor,
input?
I
Russ?
look at this as another avenue of economic growth, and I applaud you for growing. I would only ask that hopefully you come back before us, before 20 years from now, and build another building.
Grow some more, yeah.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Can I just add one thing? Part of the city's strategy on this was to have a viable partner for the land on a long-term basis. We did not want MMUA to go out in a bidding process to find land somewhere else at a more affordable price. It would have been a race to the bottom, and we might have been on the losing end, where other communities could have gave the land away for free, which was a real possibility. And so part of the strategy was to maintain that interest of MMUA, knowing that they could literally go in any community where they currently have membership. So I just kind of wanted to explain that further now that we have gotten to this point.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move us to a vote. We'll close the voting. And the motion does pass. I'll just add to the, you know, you mentioned the history. The former general manager, Greg Sherman, was instrumental in kind of the vision for what this, and he has passed now, but he'd be pleased to see the progress that you have made there.
If I may, I should also mention the contribution that Steve Johnson, the electric superintendent, has made. He has been hands-on with this project from day one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move then to agenda item number 19, to consider the approval for the auditing service contract for 2019-2022. Sharon, I believe we have a motion, recommendation to table based on additional information staff will be
Mayor and council
soliciting.
members, we did have a couple council members just question the reference checking and due diligence on the recommendation. And one of the recommendations was to maybe come forward with an additional review, which the finance staff would like to do. And we would like to bring it back at a future council meeting. I'll ask the finance director. I don't know the timing of how long it would take for you to interview or do some further review, but I'll take your advice in that area.
Thank you, Sharon. Our goal is hopefully to have interviews with each of the firms next week and bring it back on the 22nd. That is our goal. It's just whether or not we can get all four meetings done next week and have our final recommendation on the 22nd.
So the recommendation for tonight is to table till the 22nd of October.
Correct.
I so move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Kyle, on the thing, it says, consider approval for auditing service contract.
I'm not able to change it at this time.
So this is just to table it.
Yeah, just a table.
Clarification, this is to table.
Good clarification. Everyone in?
Yep.
We'll close the voting. And the motion passes. We'll move then to agenda item number 20. Consider the approval of the preliminary development agreement between the City of Marshall and APX Construction Group LLC. Sharon, I'll ask you to introduce this item.
We have further review of the preliminary development agreement, which was discussed at the previous council meeting. Our EDA Director, Tara Unken, has done some negotiation of this with the developer, and we've also consulted with Springstead, our financial advisor. And so I will ask Tara Unken and Michaela Hewitt from Springstead to come forward to present the pre-development agreement.
Okay, welcome, Tara.
Good evening. So at the last city council meeting, we had our fellow developers from Apex here that proposed the project for Block 11. With that meeting there, the city council had directed us to prepare a pre-development agreement. We talked a little bit about it at the last meeting, but I'll let Michaela explain a little bit more the differences between what a pre-development agreement means versus a full-blown development agreement, because there's pros and cons to both, and for this project, we felt that this was the best route to proceed with. So what we have is the draft pre-development agreement, and I will let Michaela talk a little bit more, but there's just mutual assurances to both parties, so we both have confidence moving forward with the next steps. So I'll let Michaela visit about that a little bit more.
Thank you, Tara. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Michaela Hewitt with now Baker Tilly, formerly Springstead. What I have before you here tonight, as Tara said, is the draft pre-development agreement, which would be between the City of Marshall and Apex Construction Group. The purpose of the pre-development agreement is really to establish a partnership between the city and the developer related to the potential redevelopment of the properties referred to as the Block 11, and they're included within the specific properties within the agreement. The developer, I think as you heard at the last meeting, is proposing a mixed-use property that would be about 56 residential units, and commercial space would be a combination as well as parking. The result of the pre-development agreement, or PDA as it's referred to, is from the RFP that the city issued in trying to solicit for developers for this area. Apex was a chosen developer, so as a result, going through this next step of the with the pre-development agreement, really what it does is, because it's city and HRA owned property, it allows the developer to have exclusive rights to understand the financial feasibility of developing on that site within a certain period of time. So from that, by having this agreement and having it be a relatively short period of time, it eliminates extensive cost and time that can go into understanding if a project is feasible, because there are certain requirements that both the city and the developer have to undertake within a defined period of time that's within the agreement. And really what we're trying to understand is overall the due diligence that's required by both parties to understand if the project is feasible based on what they're proposing and if it meets the city's requirements and guidelines. The proposal that was submitted to the city, the initial financial information provided indicated that there was a need for public participation. The anticipated tool, should public participation be needed, and that's part of the due diligence process that the city would go through, would be tax increment financing, which I'll get to what that means for next steps. There are certain requirements that both the city and the developer will agree to. And one thing I'll point out, so the term of this agreement right now is 90 days from the point it would be executed. And within that 90 days, there are timeline restriction or timeline guides that each party would have to make in order to get to that 90 days to decide. Ultimately, at the end of that 90-day period, the goal would be, if the project is deemed feasible by both the city and the developer, would be to enter into a purchase agreement where the developer would acquire that property and commence the development plans for construction of that new mixed-use facility. So again, both the city and the HRA own portions of the property. So as part of this agreement, they would agree to work together. So there'd be one parcel, single ownership of that property, which again would make it easier for selling that property to the developer and make it a cleaner process. Between the mutual benefit of this proposal and of this agreement would be that the developer and the city agree based on to getting to the purchase agreement. There are certain requirements that would have to be met. One is that the developer demonstrates feasibility of that development from a design and density perspective that would meet the city's current zoning requirements, so that it would be compliant with your zoning requirements, that there would be economic feasibility of it that would make it an economically viable within the current market. And specifically then within the developer's undertakings under Section 3, within 30 days of when this agreement would be approved and signed, the developer needs to provide the financial information to the city, which is what the city can use to understand the financial feasibility, understand the amount of public participation that would be necessary, and to make sure it's a viable deal from the city's perspective. So included within that financial information would be sources and uses of funds, operating and financial statements, and all of that would again be analyzed by the city to understand the feasibility. Within 60 days of the agreement, the developer, in addition to the financial information, would provide a schedule for the construction of the project, any engineering reports that would indicate if there's additional public improvements that are necessary related to this project, a concept review that could be proposed by the City Zoning and Planning Commission, an informational meeting as needed, and ultimately getting to a formal development proposal that would confirm what the initial development proposal and the response to that RFP indicated. And lastly, that they have the preliminary financial commitment from an institute that indicates they have the capacity to be able to complete the project. Every 2 weeks during the term of this agreement, they would provide updates to the city to give you an understanding of how we're tracking, because 90 days will go by pretty fast, and so this 2-week updates will provide an understanding to make sure we're on track with what we're anticipating for the overall goal. On the other side of that, in all of those activities, the purpose of it is to be at the sole expense of the developer, so those are not city-incurred costs. Again, the city is allowing them exclusive rights to understand if this project's viable, and so doing those preliminary activities is at their expense to make sure it's financially feasible from their end. Likewise, the city's responsibility per the agreement, it would be, again, to understand if the amount of public participation that they're asking for is reasonable, and also understanding from a financial feasibility standpoint if there's the sufficient revenues and cash flow, and based on what the request of this to the city is, if it's within reason of what the city is comfortable with providing for financial assistance, and that there's enough revenues to support those costs. Also confirming the market, and there's a market demand for the project, and that'll be based on information provided by the developer. And the other part that the city, and this kind of goes into the overall plan for the area, is that the public participation is anticipated to be in the form of a tax increment financing district. The tax increment financing district type that would be utilized would be a redevelopment district. In order to qualify as a redevelopment tax increment financing district, there are certain upfront qualifications that have to be met. The first test is that there are more than 50% of the buildings that are within the boundaries of that tax increment financing district are found to be substandard. And to be substandard, what that means is that the cost of correcting the conditions, and it's a combination of code and condition violation or issues with each property, that the cost of correcting all of those code and condition violations is greater than 15% of what the cost of new construction will be. So that's done on a building by building test for each of the buildings that would be included within the district. That's the first step that has to be met. The second step that has to be met is that at least 70% of the area within the boundaries of the tax increment district is occupied. What occupied means is that there's some type of building or similar structure. It can have gravel, parking lot, streets, utilities. can't have green space. So essentially what you're trying to understand is that you're establishing a redevelopment district, that you're removing the blight, that's the substandard buildings, and that you're building it on property that is not green space. And the point of that is that with the idea behind a redevelopment district is that there are barriers that are allowing that development to occur without the use of tax increment financing. That being the existing properties that are blighted, there's costs required for demolition, soils correction, remediation, other issues such as that if there's moving utilities. Those are all the extraordinary costs that we'll be analyzing to understand what the financial need for the project is and justification for the use of tax increment financing. So that's part of the city's steps in this process would be to understand, and earlier tonight passing the resolution finding the building to be substandard, that simply facilitates the process. It doesn't, there's no requirements by the city at that point. What it does is it allows the city the flexibility to be able to create a redevelopment district. Passing the resolution finding the building to be substandard before it's demolished preserves the ability to be able to create a tax increment district at a future date with the goal of removing the blight sooner rather than letting it continue to be on site. So so ultimately, that is the purpose of what the developer's agreeing to do, what the city's agreeing to do. At the end of 90 days, the goal is that it's considered a viable project from all the steps that the developer has taken. The city is comfortable that there is a need for public participation, understanding generally what that amount will be, and really trying to get to, after 90 days, a purchase agreement and next steps, which would include the development agreement, which would be the actual terms of the public participation between the city and the developer, as well as establishment of the tax increment financing district. Just on quickly on the cost side of it, as I mentioned, the developer's share of costs are all on the burden of the developer. The city is also taking on a burden of costs, which would include demolition of the buildings, as well as soils reports and some soils corrections as necessary, which will benefit the property. So if this project were not to proceed after the 90 days, there is still benefit to this property site by having removed the blight, understanding the current condition of the soils, and so on. So the city incurred costs will all go along with the property itself. And those are referred to as the city's costs. There's also the developer's cost, which is everything related to the legal review, the engineering consultations, architectural drawings, staff time, and then other expenses that the developer is incurring within this 90-day period. And so those are all the burden of the developer. In addition, the developer has agreed to reimburse the city for up to $7,000 for out-of-pocket costs. That would include any of the additional due diligence that the city might do above and beyond the city costs of the demolition and the soils work. And the developer, and those are referred to as the shared costs. The developer is agreeing to reimburse for up to $7,000 of those expenses. Now, at the end of this 90-day period, if the developer has fulfilled all of its obligations and has found the project to be, and it's done it in a reasonable time within the 90 days, found it to be financially or economically feasible, and for whatever reason the city chose to not move forward with the purchase agreement or approve the city participation as part of the process of the preliminary development agreement and ultimately the development agreement, there is a clause in here where the city would reimburse the developer for up to $7,000 of certain costs that were related specifically to the property. So again, you could, some of those due diligence costs that the developer had incurred that were related specifically to that property, which may include survey, soils, engineering, environmental, underground parking research, things such as that, that could be argued as a benefit to the city for if this project didn't move forward and you wanted to move forward with another developer or start the process all over again. There's also a clause that's agreed to in the agreement. There's also a clause that if they would seek reimbursement for costs that exceed $7,000 and up to a certain amount, that it would need to be requested and authorized ahead of time and approved by the city administrator. So the agreement itself is for $7,000, which you could argue they're depositing $7,000 for the city's out-of-pocket staff time. And there will be any upfront agreement if it's above and beyond that certain amount. So those are again, the highlights of the preliminary development agreement. And again, the overall purpose of it is because it is city and HRA-owned property, there's a cost of providing those exclusive rights to the developer. We want to limit the amount of time that occurs, give them the amount of time that they need to do the due diligence. We also want to eliminate or try to reduce some of the developer's upfront costs by getting too far down a path if the project's not feasible, as well as the city not getting too far down if the project's not feasible. So 90 days, trying to condense that, make sure it's feasible from both parties. Of course, the terms can always be modified if we get down the road and realize that 90 days is too fast and there's additional time or information that's needed. It can always be modified. But again, the goal is to get through this preliminary development agreement and ultimately to a purchase agreement and a contract for private development for the new mixed-use project. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Michaela. The one quick question perhaps for Tara. The developer has agreed to this?
The developer and their attorney have reviewed it, and they are good with these terms after a few back and forths, clarifications. The mutual expectations have been agreed upon and that are being presented to council.
I think this is a good process in that at our last meeting, we had the presentation of what is a large and impressive and easy to get enthused about project. This goes into some of those questions that really the developer needs to have answered and the city needs to have answered before we move forward. So this is really the detail, and I appreciate the comprehensive nature of this pre-development agreement to flesh out all of those details, as well as having a fairly tight timeline in getting that done. So thank you.
Yeah.
Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Probably this is more for Glenn. As we get in and do the demolition and we look at soil suitability, as I remember the footprint that was proposed, this is going to cross the alley, or is this not crossing the alley on Block 11?
The potential could cross the alley.
Right.
There's been some discussions of reallocating space that it wouldn't, but there's an opportunity to still develop across the alley with the continuation of the utilities that currently exist.
Right. So as we look at the site and we look at soil stability, because obviously we're in a fairly hydric part of town. We're very adjacent to the river, and we're talking about an underground lot. As we break into this, so the proposal is in the 90 days, we may actually be doing extensive excavating and replacing soils to build up a good soil base, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
John?
Just, trying to follow your 90 days that you're talking about within the agreement, and specifically looking at section 4F, that says within 60 days after the data agreement shall secure and submit to the developer a draft purchase agreement. I don't really, can't say that I spent a lot of time studying it either, but I mean, it is not really seeing that 90 day that, that you're talking about. You kind of point out that a little bit.
I was thinking that it was 90 days to get everything hashed out, so 60 days it's the draft purchase agreement, but 90 days would be the full.
And I think there's a 30-day time to
I see a
negotiate
30-day in here.
after that
Okay.
60, within the 60 days.
So we would be getting a draft purchase agreement within 60 days, but then that gives us another month to renegotiate or look at all of the items. So the length of the project would still be 90 days, or the pre-development agreement would still be 90 days. But that 60 days is just another benchmark that we would meet in there.
It is in section 9.
Fine.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions? Craig, you have something more?
Yeah, so I assume that,
Okay.
oh, go ahead, John, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I found it. Thank you.
Within the 90 days then, we're going to be getting a bid from a contractor and doing the subsoil work along with the demolition. So that's above and beyond the site demolition work?
No.
That was, the soil
Replacement
augmentation
included.
is part of?
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
all right.
No, the only thing that might be out there is what we find when we start doing the excavation at that corner where the fuel station was. So that might hold things up a little bit. But
That's a
other than
question
that,
mark that-
all the rest of it is.
Have we
taken
done
care
public utilities, the PCA tank
We've looked for
notification?
leak sites, we've talked to.
Right, yep.
All of those things that they don't have records on.
There is a public works notification that we do that should be done 10 days before we break into the project, that then gets us on the public works project list. So if we hit something,
Right.
then we're eligible. And I know you and I,
Yep.
I know you guys are familiar with that, but I want to make sure we cover that because we know that corner,
Could be.
the nicest looking part of that corner is the one that has probably the Pandora's box. And the other part of it, the reason why I asked going across the alley is I believe when those buildings by Middleton's Gas and that, there was some sub-concrete that may have been left in place.
I'm not familiar with that.
I don't remember exactly how
That
that
was
went.
under the parking lot.
Under the parking
I think we
lot.
took care of the
Okay, all right.
parking lot.
Okay, good. And then I'll stop. I don't want to dig in Pandora's box, but I don't like surprises either.
We're anticipating there will be something because we've talked with Petro Fund, MPCA, MnDOT. Nobody has records of any of the tanks being
Right.
on that corner. So, we can't,
Years ago.
there's unexpected things that will probably pop up that we will handle. And, Glenn said we would know more as we start
We
the
also have
demo.
staff that recalls the service station that was
Oh, yeah.
there.
Do you?
No,
Oh,
He's not that old.
What did I do?
there's Doris.
A couple of us remember that.
So
Oh, man.
this question for Glenn too, not in this agreement is the ability to serve water capacity for a sprinkler system?
Yes, there is that capacity.
There is, without the.
Well, we have a discussion about what we should do with Lion Street and
Right.
First Street coming up and over. And once we get a proposal for what they really want to do, then we'll get together with MMU to decide how best to provide their services.
Okay.
Power, water, sewer, storm, so.
Okay,
entrance,
thank you. That's-
egress, yeah, all those design
Yeah.
things it'll be a fun puzzle to put together.
Tim?
I guess I got a real basic question here, and as we look at these different numbers, what is the potential cost as we enter into this agreement to the city of Marshall? Basic number that the taxpayers are gonna ask. What could our cost be into this
Do you want to answer that?
agreement if the developer decides?
It's a tough one.
So
Do you count time? I mean, we're all, that's
there's
kind
very
of.
little cost threat.
So
for
we're
this-
gonna incur the cost for demolition regardless. So I
Correct, and
mean,
that was a different contract.
yep, that's a fixed cost. In this specific pre-development agreement, there will be some cost to combine all of the parcels into one, which we'd most likely do that regardless of whether it's Apex or whomever, whenever. So some of the things we will be incurring some costs. I don't know a dollar amount, but those would be items that we would be doing regardless of
So,
who the
you know,
developer
so
is.
you want to tax at minimal under 5,000?
Well,
Seven?
Up to 7 that you
Up to-
reimburse
That's, so
for.
the tax,
Yeah.
that up to 7,000 is what our cost would be if this doesn't go through.
That is reimbursed by the developer.
Correct, okay. Just,
Up to
Yeah.
15,000.
Yeah.
And if I could,
Yeah.
if I could add to that, I think there's two potential responses to that question. One is, if the city's going ahead with, like you said, if they're going ahead with demolishing the building, doing the soils corrections, those are costs you're already anticipating incurring.
Correct.
If you're going through this agreement and you decide to stop, that's why we're saying, what is the maximum city exposure? That's the 7,000, or that's, but that's the 7,000. However, as we get through this, if the project proceeds and the but-for test is but for the development, but for the assistance of development not occurring, the future tax base that you don't have now would allow you to reimburse for those demolition, for those soil correction costs. So the ultimate, and that's where the hypothetical impact question becomes more challenging, that, so should it proceed, you could reimburse for those costs with future tax base that you don't have now, and that's part of what the negotiation of how much increment's available, how you're going to use it, if there's additional public improvements that have to, those are all the ifs that we have to figure out in the 30 to 60 days once we get the information to really come back with a financing plan that would make this site feasible, cover the city's costs, cover the developer's costs, get that vertical development.
correct, I'm just looking for a simple answer to the taxpayer. If the project doesn't go through, how much does the city have invested in it? And if it's a simple 7, that's a simple answer.
Yep.
That's all I was looking, thank you.
Russ?
Just a clarification, I'm confused on the last page. It's 7,000, but and up to 15,000.
That's if it is, if Sharon approves something that's above and beyond the
That's in
scope
excess of
this.
25,000. So she'll approve anything over 7,000?
Well, that leads me into my question. So there's up to 7,000 of reimbursable costs that they can ask for. And that's if the city does not approve the plan for any reason. I mean, we just don't like the plan or think it's a bad plan, we may not approve it, or we don't agree to the financial assistance that they want. Then we have that potential $7,000 liability for reimbursing expenses. I noticed there it can go between, if it exceeds 7 and up to 15, then it needs to be approved ahead of time by the city administrator. She would have to approve any of that amount. But then there's a jump to 25,000, has to be approved by the city council. So what happens if it's 20,000?
Anything above 15 would be brought to council.
Well, here it says anything in excess of 25 will need it.
The purpose of that, and maybe I'll let City Administrator Hanson define that, but I believe that's because the maximum amount that you can approve without council approval is 25,000. So we thought, rather than go all the way up to 25,000, we wanted to limit the city's exposure to 15,000. That's a deliberate gap of saying, well, between 7 and 15,000, you have to go to the administrator, get approval before you incur those costs. We didn't want to go all the way from 7 to 25,000, knowing she's got authority for the additional 10. We wanted to limit the exposure with the intent to go above that would be city council approval.
But again, there's nothing in the language talking about what's between 15 and 25.
We can-
25 and above is city council, up to 15 is the city administrator, so there's nothing between 15 and 25. Who approves that?
So the intent was we didn't want to go all the way up to 20, but we can certainly, we
think-
wanted to be consistent with the city's policy
Right.
for those expenses, but we could either go to 15 or 25 on either way.
But you can
so
see
it's
there's a
clear.
gap there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there should be a
It was
gap.
deliberate, but it can
But there
be
is a gap, and it
open-ended.
should be closed somehow.
So either the
Yeah.
15 should be changed to 25, or the 25 should be changed to 15.
Correct.
The other point on that is that
Council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if it's between 7 and 15, it needs to be requested ahead of time and then approved. But there is no such language with regard to the city council's part where they have to request ahead of time from the city council and approved before they spend it. So in the one
From the 7
case,
to 15, you're saying?
what's that?
Or from the 15 to 25, you're saying? Okay.
The 7 to 15 has to be approved ahead of time, but doesn't say anything about above that, where the city council approves, so that language is loose too.
You
And
could
would that be the same situation where the city council would have to approve it before they spend it?
Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, that should be in the language then,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's not there.
It's
Could we just make one
Implied.
clarification? Any cost in excess of $15,000 instead of $25,000?
Just change the
Yeah.
25 to 15.
Perfect.
That, you're okay with that, Sharon?
Yep.
That solves it.
And they should be approved ahead of time by the city council then too, anything.
It says it that.
Yep.
Yeah, if we change the 25 to 15, Glenn, then it does.
That
In
would take
excess
care
of
of that.
$15,001 or whatever.
And we'll add in advance for city council as well.
Ahead of time.
Yep.
Before they spend the
Yep.
money.
Yep.
Yeah, that language should be
Yep.
in there.
Both of us.
And
You sleep?
I changed it.
I guess what I'm wondering too here is that suppose that the developer claims that the city is acting in bad faith, that they have a good plan. It's just that the city does not want to participate as fully in the plan as the developer wants us to. Is there a possibility that the developer could sue the city that we're acting in bad faith and that he incurred expenses and he should be reimbursed for those expenses? So wouldn't that open us up to some potential liability?
Isn't that addressed in
It's
the
addressed in
indemnification?
Section 10, the indemnification clause.
I don't know if that totally does, but.
And it's not the city that's just taking risk. I mean, the developer is taking risk by investing a lot of time in our site and potentially a lot of dollars in our community. So no risk, no reward. We're taking a little bit of a risk by doing this demolition, but they're also taking a risk and putting a lot of time and design and efforts into this site too. So I think we need to take this step and move forward together. Just like we toured the Herzog project today, it's a public-private partnership, and that's a perfect example of it. This project would be, could be in the future another prime example of the public sector and the private sector working together to make our community better. I think this is the next step of what you guys have to decide on.
Yeah, and in support of exactly that, this has been a long-term goal project that the city has had to get to Block 11 to where it is, and this is the big step to finally get us to that point. And so with that, I would move approval of the preliminary development agreement between the City of Marshall and Apex Construction Group LLC with the noted amendments that were discussed.
Second that.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
In section 4, it talks about us having the financial or fiscal and development consultant Baker Tilly prepare a report. Do we have any idea what the cost of that report is going to be?
That's the 7,000.
That's the 7,000
That's covered
right
in
there?
the shared cost.
That's it?
Yeah. Or that, up to that amount. Up to
Other
that.
discussion on the motion?
I think this is a good step forward. I understand the city may pay up to $7,000 to get a $12 million investment. I think that's a minor cost at this point. So I obviously second some approve this, then I hope it passes.
Other discussion on the motion?
One thing.
Mr. Mayor, if I could clarify Councilmember Barakoler's question on the what happens if the city thinks they did everything correct. Under Section 9, Term of Agreement, exclusive negotiations, this agreement shall terminate 90 days after the date hereof or upon execution by the parties of the purchase agreement, whichever occurs first. If for any reason a purchase agreement has not been entered into by the parties within the terms of this agreement or any mutually approved extension thereof, this agreement shall be null and void, and subject to 7.7, neither party shall have any liability or obligations to the other. So that's the purpose of the 90 days, is if it doesn't work out.
We can both part ways, shake hands and part ways if it doesn't work out, so, which we don't want that to happen, but.
Hope not. Yes.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting, and the motion passes.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move then to the next agenda item, which is City Hall update. Sharon?
Mayor and council members, as you recall at the last council meeting, the city council did authorize the commencement of the bidding process. We have since submitted the bid, the advertisement for bid to the proper channels for publication. And at that particular meeting, we weren't able to have Engen and Associates, our selected architect, kind of present a general overview of the project. So tonight, we did want them to do that. They did meet briefly earlier today with the City Hall Committee and gave an update on this. And this is an opportunity for the council to kind of see where we've gotten to since the last presentation, which was a couple months ago. So we have with us tonight Richard Engen from Engen & Associates, and also Barbara Marks, who's both done a lot of work in getting this ready for bid letting. So I'll just have you come before and do an overview of the project. There is no formal request for action. This is information only.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to give you a quick status update, and it's probably repeating some of the information that Sharon gave. I'm Barbara Marks. I'm with Engen Associates. We have Richard Engen, and back there we also have Andy Engen from our office. And moving forward, he would be the person who would be on site and doing a lot of construction administration. We wanted to let you know that we met with the building committee today, and we did a 95% review. Prior to that, we've met with staff and with administration to work through things like workflow and function and make sure that what we're seeking, what we're doing is meeting the needs of safety wellness, security, different items, accessibility, all these things that we've talked about at each one of our meetings. We are currently running ad for bid in your legal paper, and I believe that Sharon's also forwarding some of that information to the League of Minnesota Cities. In addition to that, and if you see the ad for bid, you'll see that we're sending it to several exchanges. We're doing what we can to get the word out. Those exchanges are located in Minnesota and in the Dakotas. We have a mandatory pre-bid meeting that will be held on October 17th, and the point of that meeting is to get the contractors on site so that they can see exactly what situation we're dealing with and the extent of the work that we need on the project. We are also looking on an October 31st date for single prime bids to come in. There's no, as Sharon mentioned, there's no board decision required at this time. We're just trying to give you an update on where we're at. Richard, do you want to make some comments on the actual building itself?
We do have the plans and specs here, and we could put you all to sleep pretty fast if we wanted to, but I don't think you have the time for that. We're looking for, as Barbara mentioned, one prime contract to manage the project. Our experience is that people are still wanting work, but people have a lot of work. All contractors have a hard time getting staff today. So this is probably one of the more challenging times for the whole building industry because it's so busy. But this is a good project. It's in the area. I know your local contractors are very interested, and we anticipate we'll have good bids at the end of the month.
Is that with a mid-October mandatory site meeting and October 31st, is that adequate time?
Our experience is on most projects, regardless of the size, the plans aren't looked at until you have a deadline. And having it 2 weeks before the bid opening, it gets them, they'll get shake and look at it. Many projects, the busiest time we'll have with answering questions will be the 3 days before, the last 3 days.
The last week, for sure.
What I like to do, when we can be a little more informal, we intentionally delaying the bid opening last week again, so they start looking at it earlier. And this one, because of the nature of remodeling a downtown site here, the meeting is very important. And we would schedule a second meeting if somebody has a conflict with it, to make sure we don't rule somebody out with that. But we do want to meet them on site for this project before they bid.
Questions for Richard or Barbara? Not, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you leaving a set of those plans too? Just a- Okay,
We'll just leave it on the table here.
okay. Yep.
We'll move then to the agenda item number 22, Commission Board Liaison Reports. From my standpoint, the Fire Relief Association has not met since we last met, and the Southwest Regional Development Commission has their monthly meeting this Thursday. Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Southwest Minnesota Regional Amateur Sports Commission met at noon today, and they'd also met on the 26th, some 10 days ago. Just a few points, and this actually comes from the minutes of the meeting last month or 10 days ago. The MAHA is up. The last year that they were on their own, not counting the varsity high school players, they were between 120 and 130 skaters. This year they look at 185 to 190, and they could possibly hit 200. Their goal is to ring the bell at 200, and that doesn't include the varsity. So that's really good news. We got some preliminary finances back. I know there was a question about the 5% of the gross that we do not take. That would come up to roughly about $3,100 for 2019, which was their best year by far. Just to give you a contrast, in 2016, their last year at Lockwood, they grossed just short of $31,000. In 2017, the first year at Red Baron, under contract management, it was $6,634 was the total concession revenue. In 2018, when MAHA took it over, they were just short of $60,000. And last year, they were just short of $64,000. Giving themselves $12 an hour for their volunteer hours at just short of 1,000 hours. They figured about $12,000 was revenues that were unrealized labor costs, and their potential profit was about $12,000. Just last year was their lowest cost share with the city in Red Baron, and they gave out $4,745. In 2018, it was $11,200, and in 2017, it was $10,000 was their returns back and their contribution in actual cash dollars back to Red Baron. So that was the little bit of update there. And of course, they're looking at other tournaments. They're really struggling right now with bringing in, maximizing everything, because a lot of the associations, both in baseball with MABA, because MABA is also part of this, and MAHA is having rooms available. You know, it's really our limiting factor right now is hotel space. So that's good news. I mean, that's a very good problem to have. They are also, we have hit the critical mass where we're having conflicts now with other things other than hockey on the Reinhardt rink, on the main rink. And they've lost 2 weekends this year where they can't put ice on as early as they wanted to. They're working with the Lockwood rink on the, you know, the permanent ice. And they've given up 2 full weekends where they would normally be out for hockey because we have other things booked. So that's a really good problem to have also. They'll be bringing together a board to look at other investments. There's priorities. They came to us and talked again about an outdoor rink, about dry land building, which would be a cooperation or a partnership. So they're actually looking at doing some subcommittees to start working on that, because there's need there, and they want to make sure that it's done smart and in conjunction with our plan. So they're actually looking at a 5-year and a 10-year planning effort to look at what would the growth potential be, because as the new shine wears off on Red Baron, Mankato's looking at a big project. They've been very envious of Red Baron, and so they're looking at doing a project. So we want to make sure that we leverage as best we can the fact that we still have the new shiny rink and the new shiny facility, and make sure that we leverage that to bring in some good experience. The tournament growth right now with both MAHA, especially with MAHA, is a lot of Nebraska and Dakota teams. Brookings has had a problem now. They can't book in the demand for the tournaments, and we're going to take serious advantage of that. So that whole facility is in a real good place right now, and I feel really good about where that's gone. And I just wanted to give you that update, and there'll be more to come. We're going to be back meeting monthly again. There's enough going on, so instead of having quarterly updates on Southwest Amateur Sports Commission, we should be getting back to monthly, and I don't have any new updates on Merit, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
And just to add one thing on there was a large event there this weekend, and I heard very good comments about the additional parking lot, even though it wasn't quite completed yet, but it was fully utilized.
It's excellent. Yep. And I see they were striping it today.
Yep.
Looks good. Looks really good.
Steve?
I have no report, Mr. Mayor.
Glenn?
Planning Commission meets tomorrow, and Housing Commission meets later this month.
John?
Mine did not meet, but I would like to thank the EDA members that were able to take part in the workshop this afternoon and really do some discussion on the future of the EDA. So I appreciate their participation.
Russ?
Library Board will meet next week. Police Advisory Board did not meet, but a couple of us, City Attorney Simpson and myself, were able to attend. We were the only 2 members of the public that attended the body camera presentation put on by Public Safety. So that'll be coming forth to the council at a later date. CVB met in reference to the events at the Red Baron Arena. They had the gun show. They're also talking about having a haunted tower at the Merit Center. So, and then they're in the process of conducting a monthly trivia with the various bars around town. So, and facing them, along with the numerous other commissions and within the city, we have a number of board openings. So that's all I have.
And Jim?
Mine did not meet.
We'll move then, thank you. We'll move then to council member individual items. Craig Lister, and you're in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have it. I just wanted, I'm actually going to use my individual item to bring up one more thing about Red Baron. One of the other discussions about concessions was the wear and tear and replacement of equipment. And I was reminded after the meeting that the $50,000 worth of equipment that is in that concession stand was all donated by Reinhardt Foods, because of the fact that they have a very good outlet now to supply. And the understanding that I have is they're extremely happy with the current status of the concession operation, and as those contracts come back up for sponsorship, they want to make sure that they maintain the involvement. And there have been some issues with some of the equipment. So far, it's all been under warranty. But the other understanding in the conversation that we had with Maha today is that as those things come up, they're prepared to do a lot of that maintenance because they're operating it. So I think we still have a really solid relationship with them, and I just wanted to reiterate that also, that thank you to Reinhardt for stepping up and really putting in good supplies and good equipment in there, and then also, again, to Maha, because they take some ownership in that and have been very supportive of it.
Steve?
I have nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Glenn?
I have nothing.
Jim?
I have a couple of things. Actually, there's two, I don't know if you call them ribbon cuttings, excuse me. But last week, Southwest Coaches had their open house out at their bus station. Glad to see that they rebuilt. You know, a lot of times when businesses burn down, they choose to maybe leave city limits or whatever. They did not. They have a beautiful facility out there redone from tragedy, but it's redone. And then I was out at Unique Opportunities in their ribbon cutting in their new facility, their apartment building. And Tara made mention of it. It's a private-public partnership. The building looks very nice. They did a nice job, and I look forward to seeing their next one. And it's good to see the development, because as we're standing out there, you start to think, and you have the bus station that was just built, the apartment, you got track chair adding on, you got Harrison Truck adding on, you have,
UCAP.
thank you, Marsh Machine Shop adding on.
UCAP.
UCAP is adding Head Start, and you have more housing starts this year than we've had in quite a while here in Marshall with the development out in Parkway Edition and Car Estates out there along 23. So there's a lot of building going on. There's a lot of economic growth going on in Marshall right now, and I think that's very positive for our city. And I just want to put that out there, because you hear the doom and gloom, but there's a lot of workers going on, a lot of construction going on, and those are decent paying jobs. So if we can keep adding to that, that adds to our economic development in Marshall. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Russ?
Maybe along those lines, I had an individual approach me and asked me if we were going to have town hall meetings this fall. So, hadn't thought about it, but maybe it's a good time to maybe consider it, or maybe plan for the spring or something with all the projects that we've got going on. Might be a good time to get citizen reaction to City Hall. I don't know, but somebody asked me about town hall meetings for the council again, so that's all I have.
John?
And just to kind of add on to what Jim brought up on the apartments that did the ribbon cutting, and the fact that we did a ribbon cutting on 36 apartments that are about 80% filled already. So it is impressive to see. If you get a chance to get out there and just take a look at it, they're getting ready and planning to do phase 2 and then move right into phase 3. So they're pretty pleased with the turnout that went out there.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you, John. I would just add one thing. Thank you to President Pro Tem John for filling in. I was out of town for a family funeral for out of state for a few days, and John filled in at some ribbon cuttings and other things, and yeah, so thank you for that. With that, let's move to the next agenda item, which is staff report. Sharon.
Since we have a discussion on health insurance following this meeting, I don't want to give a report in the essence of time, so thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Sharon? Glenn?
One item, thank you, Mayor and Council. The Merit Center is going to have an open house on the 24th. And I would recommend that anyone listening and anyone here should go to that. I think they have a great schedule kind of shown for that meeting. And maybe they'll have some demonstrations and some activities going out there that you haven't seen before. So I think that's great. That's all I'll have for today.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn. Dennis?
I think everything that I had has been touched on. Unique opportunities out there. Yes, I was approached by their lender and by the developer. Can they start working on phase 2 documents? I talked to Troy Johnson, their contractor, that I believe they're going to be submitting an application for an excavation permit yet this fall. They thought if they could get the site excavated and footings in now, that would move up next spring's process about 4 or 5 months. They could start framing in March. Otherwise, if they don't do the footings now, then they're gonna have to wait for everything to dry out and may not start framing until July. So we're trying to cooperate with the processing of the paperwork to move them into phase 2. Helena continued to work with MnDOT Aviation regarding the grant documents. And many of you at the EDA will remember, it's been 7 years ago since Brow Brothers moved their operations here. November 1, next month, they make their last loan payment to the EDA, and then they have completed that business subsidy agreement. And so working on finalizing those, and we'll be bringing that to EDA yet next week. So yeah, 7 years already. It's been significant.
With that, thank you, Dennis. We'll move then to the remaining agenda items. You have the administrative briefs and information there, as well as the information items and the listing of upcoming meetings, which brings us to adjournment of this meeting. I would entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ to adjourn. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting, and we are adjourned. We'll take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll reconvene in the work session.